Hello there, and welcome once again to the Scott and Ross Show,
Howdy do.
as hosted by
Scott and
Ross. I've got to make sure I don't overdo these jingles. Well, no, I mean, we'll obviously, we've recorded them. They're damn well going to get included at some point, but just I don't want to overdo the jingles. Do you get me, bruv?
I'll get you.
I can think of nothing more heinous than that, to overdo a jingle or a series of jingles.
Not sure. But at the same time,
Occasionally-
it's something that came from us. So, how bad can it be?
I know. Yeah, I know. I don't think anyone will be campaigning to bring back capital punishment for you and I if we put one too many in an episode.
Maybe corporal punishment.
Right. And now we're on to day 3 and the final day of this honourable festival of mentions that we're doing, or I'm doing. And of course, that can only mean one thing. As I said before, it's the final day. We're going to make sure it gets closed out in style with the absolute headliner, my favourite band of all time, without question. So I guess I need to make sure sufficient time is allowed for that. And I'm delighted that Luz is also a big fan, so we can discuss.
Oh,
that
for
one.
sure.
But what did I say at the end of the last one? Don't go off and get too ruined, because we got day 3. So let's say you did get a bit ruined. Trust me, this band will boot you into the day, and no mistake. So this is the first band of day 3, and they're a band who are very much up tempo and crazy and diverse, and a band I think more than some of the others I've spoken about have sort of broken more into the mainstream, really, or at least they're a band that people are aware of, because they are absolute powerhouses really in the rock world, or at least who were for a period of time. And Loz, I'll see if you can name this band. I don't think you will, based on what I said there.
Yeah.
You know what we said? You know what we said last episode about a very divisive vocalist?
Oh, yes. It does. It doesn't. It doesn't. Oh my God.
Well, I get
this is great for the listeners.
I get the feeling you're thinking of the right band.
Yes, I know. So annoying because I can't get the name of Sigur Rós out of my head, but that's the band we were talking about earlier, isn't it?
Yes, this band's quite far away from that. I'll just say it. It's not a problem. It's the Mars Volta.
It's not the Mars Volta. God damn it! I was just about to say it's not the Mars Volta, is it?
Well, it is the Mars Volta. And again, I kind of, some listeners may have heard of this band because they are really quite well known, I'd say. Or like I say, they were for a period of time because they disbanded some time ago. But I can't believe they haven't made my top 10 either, to be honest, because in particular, their debut album, which is called Deloused in the Comatorium, is an absolute goddamn masterpiece. And it's an album that has like how can I put it? It's kind of got this air of magic about it. I mean, you listen to the opening intro that kind of goes seamlessly into the opening track. They go together perfectly. And it just, it's something, it's hard to describe. It feels like something special, almost something which transcends kind of music and has this like aura of energy around it. And like, magic, it feels magical somehow. And it's hard to describe. You may not get the same feeling at all if listening to it, but they go together perfectly. And funny enough, Robin, if you're listening, I'm pretty sure it was you that, unless I've completely misremembered this or got the names mixed up, I'm sure that Gaz was talking about you two listening to this record on Spotify and the free version of Spotify. So you can see where I'm going here, can't you? The intro, and then the way it builds, and then advert. And so it broke up the two. And apparently, Robin was just like, Gaz was genuinely concerned for his safety. He'd never seen someone in such a fit of rage. Someone that he thought he knew, just in completely overcome with murderous hate. Yeah, which I can understand, actually. Because,
I can understand.
Yeah, it's we talk about bringing back the death penalty. Those two tracks should have just been recorded together, really, and released as one. But I can understand why they weren't, because the album was recorded pre Spotify playlist kind of advertisement revenue world,
Yes,
and so it would be seamless regardless. But unfortunately, these days, no, that doesn't necessarily happen. So
and those adverts are offensively inane as well.
Yeah, they are. They're just, I think they're almost designed to irritate, to almost Like,
Yeah, to get you to pay for the full thing to take them off. Yeah.
yeah, like it's on one hand, it's like beating you to the end of your tether, and at the other, it's like cajoling you into just signing up. It's yeah. Anyway, we
Worked
can't
for
have a go.
me.
We can't have a go at Spotify. Are we having a go at Spotify?
No,
I suppose whilst we're, pros and cons of Spotify, one huge pro, of course, is the
but we're on it.
we're on it, yeah. Oh God, what's the word I'm looking for here? Exposure probably is the word I'm thinking of. That if it wasn't for Spotify, people wouldn't have been introduced to some bands they've gone onto a door and then go and buy the works of in a physical copy or whatever. I'm gonna have to chop half this bit out, I think.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So
we're just two mates talking now, aren't we?
We'll keep the bit in about the murderous rage over the.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, Deloused is an album to be listened to without distraction and certainly without advertisements being shoved in between tracks, And yeah, so let's talk about the voice of the vocalist, Cedric Bixler-Zavala, who has like a very high-pitched voice that I'm sure immediately is off-putting to many. It's very distinctive, could be seen as very grating, I imagine.
Certainly unique. Really,
it's the kind of thing I would probably typically hate, but for me, it fits so well with the energy of this music. And I can't describe why I love it like I do, really, because, like I say, the vocalist will make or break a band for me. And I'm very opinionated, if you haven't gathered already. And I can't explain sometimes why I love one vocalist and then find another difficult. For example, I should really dislike Brian Ferry or David Sylvian, the vocalist from Japan, but I love them. But then I find the likes of sort of David Bowie's voice much harder to get on with, or even Peter Hamill. I think because they're more strained, maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But I love the energy Cedric brings to an already very energetic band, and so that's probably my pick for their albums. Having said that, Loz, I must quickly mention Francis the Mute and Amputecture, the two subsequent ones that are almost as good, if not as good. In fact, Francis the Mute kicks off with a track called Cygnus Vismund Cygnus. Not sickness, Cygnus, as in Cygnus, as if I know what that means. I just think of Signet, which is a baby swan, isn't it? But anyway,
well, I don't think Cygnus is surely in reference to Freud.
No, that's Sigmund, isn't it? Not Vismund. It could be. Yeah. But anyway, Cygnus. It's not a song about swans either, or indeed a swan song. In some ways, I'd say if you've never heard the band before, listen to that song, Cygnus, Vismund Cygnus, or the start of Deloused, which we've just talked about at length. It's magical. I can't put it any better. It's magical. They're kind of a band that, again, I'm almost afraid of coming out with my bold comments, but hey, that's part of who I am. I want to say this, so I will. I feel like they're almost the modern Led Zeppelin in terms of just but they sound very different, but the energy, the aura is very similar. It's and that's what I'm focusing on there, not the actual sound, the tone, but just the vibe. And you wouldn't see Led Zeppelin necessarily, as mentioned Spotify again, Led Zeppelin probably wouldn't come up as like a artists who listen to this, or recommended similar band. But I can see similarities between the energy that Led Zeppelin would bring to a live performance with Robert Plant, who have got another person who lives very nearby, Loz, or Cedric and the Mars Volta. I can see them in the same light. If anyone else can, let me know, or if you can't, let me know why.
Well, I mean. They've certainly got a chaotic energy about them. That's something that I've always admired. And as you say, the vocalist is very unique, but I think it suits their style. But the thing that I can't seem to get away from in my own head is I can just imagine my dad or someone like that who was not exactly other than classical music, he didn't really have a great range with music, and I can just hear him saying, They sound like a band in a suitcase getting kicked down the stairs.
Yeah, I can understand that. They are a racket. They're just a beautiful racket.
There's a real sense of momentum in a lot of their work,
they're cacophonous, but they're calculated and very melodic as well. They are a hard one to pin down. I don't know what you'd put them in as a genre. I mean, most people would probably say progressive rock or progressive metal, but they're all kind of no, it's not New Mexico, is it? But they've got a Spanish American influence. You know, that they're from they might even be sort of Texan, or I know it doesn't sound Texan, but I think they're from that kind of general area where there's a Spanish kind of influence. Maybe it is New Mexico or something like that. I should have looked this up. Maybe I'm just thinking of New Mexico because I'm thinking of Breaking Bad in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And Los Hermanos.
Yeah, you're definitely right. There's certainly a Latin. I would almost say potentially even at times like a South American sort of vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very diverse, very beautiful. I don't even know if I could learn one of their riffs to play, to be honest, because Omar Rodriguez Lopez, who must be name checked whilst we're talking about this band.
What a name!
I know. I don't know. I couldn't really necessarily think of a particular. I might just learn a riff somewhere and stick it in. But it, again, as I've done with the past bands, it won't do them justice. It's just a little, 2-second snippet or something. And it's just fun for me. It's a nice way to... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say a little bit of seasoning on the side of your plate.
Yeah, it's the garnish, on the discussion that we've had. And it's also a nice way to include the band and at the same time cheekily circumventing any kind of copyright licensing issues.
Yeah. And as we've mentioned, Mr. Rodriguez Lopez, and again, what a name. I'd just like to point out that essentially that I've remembered that he did a solo album called Apocalypse Inside an Orange.
The Apocalypse
it's always
Inside
stayed
an
with me.
Yeah, I think I've got it somewhere.
Oh, you definitely have. Well, you had it at one point because I was there to observe it.
I'm looking at Amputecture, Mars Volta. Yeah, my CD collection has diminished quite sadly down the years, and in fact, a lot of my stuff I kept in underneath the decking in my dad's garden for about a year. And
oh God!
Although I'd gone to great lengths to sort of quadruple wrap things and make sure it was waterproof and resistant to the elements and stuff, sadly, a couple of things. Well, I say a couple of things. Half the stuff still perished, and much of that was my CD collection. So my book collection is definitely bigger than my CD collection now, and it's But I kept kind of some of the cases, as weird as that might sound, just because it's nice to just look at them. We talked in the first episode on Music the Prologue about the journey we went on, through different bands, and I can see it when I look at these because I can see a lot of the really early albums that I owned that I've still got, and then funny enough, many of the more recent procurements have been the ones that are ruined. So yeah, I probably owned the Apocalypse Inside of an Orange, Loves, but I can't see it right now.
Yes.
But yeah, the Mars Volta, what a band. What a band to kick off day 3 with. What a band to open. Now, there's not too many bands in day 3, but again, like I said, I've just tried to be conscious of time because we've got a headliner coming up. But should we keep up a bit of a high energy?
Oh, let's.
I wouldn't necessarily call this guy one of my favorite artists, but I just kind of want to mention him quickly because like the sort of joy his music brings. It's funny, it's entertaining. I don't think anyone could listen to it and not say that was entertaining. And again, it's a solo artist. It's an American dude by the name of Lewis Cole, spelt with an OU, as in like Louis C.K.
As in King Louis.
Yes. And I mean, I laugh every time I think of the name Lewis Cole just because of those compositions, which are just kind of uplifting beyond belief, really. Again, if you kind of wanted something to pick you up after a bit of a shit day, I'd try one of his tunes, to be honest. Maybe start with one called like F It Up, which kind of starts off slow and you might get 20 seconds in and think, really? But trust me, stick with it because it springs a nice surprise, doesn't it? And then
it certainly does.
If you like that, Thinking is maybe his most popular tune, which, hard to see why not. But if you're still interested, move on to a track called Mean It, which is by some distance my favorite he's done. It's got this really, you can probably hear the smile as I'm saying this. It's got this aggressive funk vibe, I guess. And weirdly, it carries quite an important mantra in the lyrics, which is basically, you can do what you want to, you can be what you want to, you can say what you want to, but mean it. And I love that. I feel like that's just true to living life in the best way for yourself.
Sure.
Do you get what I mean? I think if
Yeah,
we all
there's,
carried
there's
that mantra into life, it wouldn't necessarily suddenly make us fascist, racist, whatever. It would just make us honest, and it would make us healthier as a result. You know, people are meant to just whatever's in them that needs to come out to get it out.
yeah,
So that honesty to carry that, you know, it's like Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm. That's how life should be lived, in terms of just getting things off your chest, being honest with someone about something, not stifling a comment or even withdrawing or holding back a comment entirely because you're worried about how it might be perceived. No, just be yourself, be honest.
yeah.
So
I think that's almost a little bit like what we're doing here. You know, I think there's a time where we could have picked certain different bands or certain different films to try and be cool or even edgy or whatever. But no, this is real people with real opinions, and
yeah,
I hope that's coming across to you all.
yeah, and that's why, you know, I'm happy to hear Marvel come up for Loz. And by the way, we've started the process of watching the films from our combined watch list, and we've got through one each so far, haven't we? One was a Jim Carrey film, one was a Marvel film. So, and I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of the Marvel films, Loz, and I'm glad that you brought them all up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love this mantra of just be honest, which Lewis Cole. But I mean, yes, it's sort of buried underneath this ridiculous funk. So, I mean, he's hilarious and a multi-instrumentalist, very talented guy. And I suppose one artist to bring up in the same breath again would be a guy called Mark Rebier, who's, again, just pure enjoyment. He's got this like setup with a looping station, much like Beardy Man kind of has, if you know Beardy Man.
Yeah.
And just sort of improvises everything and comes out with these hilarious, funky, catchy, just improvised pieces. And so, yeah, you know, I'm mentioning these two because of everyone I've talked about. Lewis Cole in particular, I don't think a single listener could check out and dislike. I'd bet my testicles on it.
Wow, that's really putting your balls on the table, isn't it?
I know. Yeah. Well, there they are. Right. Right, could we go back to metal now, please, Lars?
Sure.
Because we're in the penultimate act now of this festival, so I think it makes sense to kind of segue towards metal again. And again, a band who are criminally underrated, and that's a band called Intronaut. Again, you know, for anyone that's listening that doesn't like metal, please do just check out a track from each of these, because it's probably not the metal you've heard and have been put off metal by. That's my point, because I'm very picky when it comes to metal. I mean, I do like things like Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, yeah, you know, but I don't mind. But then just the majority of metal does nothing for me, nothing. But we're not going to spend the time talking about those bands, are we, Lars? We're going to talk about Intronaut. Who started out with quite a doomy sound, I'd say, but have become much more upbeat and up-tempo, and dare I say it, much catchier with their last two releases. I mean, the most recent of which came out last year, which does seem to be regarded as their best, including, you know, the band, which is called Fluid Existential Inversions. But my favorite is the one before that, The Direction of Last Things. And again, I cannot believe this didn't make the top 10 albums. I mean, the album before that has probably my favorite Intronaut song on it, called Milk Leg, which is like the final 2 or so minutes of that are just perfection. Anyone that knows me on Facebook will have probably seen me share that, you know, just probably about 4 times down the years, like this bit. Oh, like it just touches my soul, you know. It's not heavy at all. It's just rhythmic, and it's hard to describe. It's quite one of my favorite sections of music ever. And I mean, again, you know, like I say, if Intronaut haven't made the top 10, what has? You know, we'll have to just find out, won't we? But if you want a good introduction to this band, I would say, well, I talked about The Direction of Last Things being their best album, and I'd say check out the first song on that, because it's got a good video as well. It's called Fast Worms. And, you know, if you want to see a stoner dolphin getting in a bar fight and all sorts of things, that's your video to go.
How could you not?
Out. And so, yeah, I suppose in summary, that's Intronaut, you know, keeping it short and sweet. I love them. I love them. They're one of my favorite, arguably my favorite metal band around at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't honestly say I can pin down one tune of theirs.
Um,
I'll have to sort that out.
well, just like the listeners, Lars, I trust you will go off and check out Fast Worms by Intronaut. If nothing else, the video will entertain you. I guarantee it.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, I a very technical band, insane time signatures. I mean, there's a track. In fact, I can't remember what it's called, but I think it's track 2 on that album, the one after Fast Worms, that's got this riff towards the end, which I don't know how to make sense of it. I sort of have just through the repetition of hearing it, but I've got no clue as to what's going on, like what the time signature is, what one bar of 7th, whatever, and then 2 of this. I couldn't sort of quantify it or write it down, but I guess just through having heard it about 600 times, I can kind of finally nod my head correctly to it rather than just looking like a complete and utter melon. It's really hard to describe. They're a very technical band, very, very time signatory, but then the melody carries it. So it's not so much about that. They've got 2 vocalists, both of which kind of can do clean vocals, which is nice. And another thing I particularly like about the band is they put their bassist front and center. The 2 singers and 2 guitarists are like either side. And then, you've got the bassist. I think he's called Joe Lester, who plays with a fretless bass. He's just a legend. There's something about him that reminds me slightly of you, Loz. I don't know. Maybe it's just like the kind of vibe he's got.
He's definitely a legend then.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's probably just that, isn't it? Loz is a legend. Yeah, yeah.
Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Loz.
Yeah,
legendary.
I mean, I almost want to name check all the members of the band, but the thing is that they did have my favorite drummer probably around at the moment, but sadly he left for quite personal reasons, really, which I won't go into. But they've got a new drummer now who is about probably as good as I think a replacement they could have found, but he's still not the same. I fail to see how they could release anything else now that would stack quite up against the direction of Last Things for me. I think that was like a perfect equilibrium of the band members, and it just caught them at their peak, as it were. And Devin Townsend, I think, produced it or mixed it or something. So anything with his involvement gets an extra point as well.
Well, funnily enough, not to force your hand or indeed to jump the gun, but we're going to be talking in a minute about another band which featured a shake-up of personnel that somewhat affected the not necessarily the quality, but the tone and direction, perhaps, of the band.
I would say the quality.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Nicely done, Lars. And in fact, as much as it would be beautifully smooth to go straight into it, I do have to ask whether we can just pause it so I can go to the toilet, because also, this band are going to take some time, so I want to make sure that I'm not crossing my legs throughout.
Yeah. But by all means.
All right. Right. Thank you for that, Lars, and everyone. Mission accomplished. At the urination station.
Right, let's reconvene.
So we are now at the headliner of the entire Festival of Mentions, and with that, of course, my final mention before the top 10 albums, Loz. So to close out this little festival and send everyone home in high spirits, I hope. And in fact, if you are on your way home now, pull over for a second. If you can, as I say this, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, Loz. These guys didn't make my top 10 albums.
I know, which is shocking because they did mine.
I know. I said that as if there was any shock value to you, but I told you this a week ago, didn't I?
Yes.
And I mean, maybe they do make my top 10, but I've really thought about this, and as it stands, they don't. So that's all I can say. Really, they don't. And of course, you know who I mean here, Loz. They're my favorite band of all time, I'd say. They're the band I discovered around the same time as Pink Floyd, which we talked about. Probably the band that have had the biggest influence on me. The band that really got me playing guitar. The band I think I owe the biggest debt of gratitude to. And I'm introducing this one, Loz. I'm sorry. It's Opeth. So I don't know how I'm going to keep this short, really, but
you're not.
I'll give it my bestest. This is a band that have been around since something like 1995, and they kind of started out very much in the sort of death black metal scene, to be honest, for 2 albums at least. Which, yeah, I like moments on them, but overall I'm not a massive fan. They're almost like shanties, you know. There's a pirate element, I think, to a lot of that stuff, and a certain production aesthetic with it. And it just, you know, back then they were very young and just embracing the kind of black metal scene and just putting their own spin on it. But those were not 2 albums that made them the band that I consider them, you know. So yeah, I mean, after that is when they really started to do that, and when they became the band that are kind of so celebrated in the world of just progressive music in general. You know, forget metal, because to lump them into metal would be overall to pay a bit of a disservice to them. You know, these guys have got fans in their 50s and 60s, likely beyond, such as just the majesty of what they do. Yeah, back then with those early albums, they were very heavy, kind of growling vocals, but I don't know, at the same time, they were done in such a way that you could still probably hear the lyrics. And they did suit the music. I mean, like, say, well, Linkin Park, you know, we mentioned back at the start of this music series, they were juxtaposed with like incredible clean vocals when they was. And again, from the same guy. And I'll mention his name in due course. But yeah, this guy was like the lead guitarist and an incredible guitarist as well. Yeah, I cannot emphasize incredible enough. Like, and before I do name him, I suppose let's just discuss what supposedly constitutes a good guitarist. Like, is it technical proficiency or speed? Well, not necessarily. I mean, they fall into the same category for me, and no. I'd say it's knowing what to play with that restraint we were talking about, but still possessing that technical proficiency when required to sort of suit the moment. And just getting that right time and time again over the course of like decades. And so let's name him at this point. Michael Ackerfeld, one of my biggest heroes. And you're a fan as well, Loz.
Oh, definitely. Such a cheeky personality, but in a good way.
Yeah, he did.
He's a music nerd, isn't he? I think that's one of the endearing things for me is, you know, anyone who really like loves what they do, and not just what they do, but has an appreciation for, you know, lots of different sort of genres and types.
Yeah, he is. I mean, you know, I know that his work will get, you know, kind of pigeonholed into metal, but he's a fan of like ABBA, you know, and then, you know, I don't know, the likes of Renaissance and bands like that of the sort of 70s, and I think he just kind of likes everything. And like you say, he's got a wicked dry sense of humor, which you certainly see if you go and see him live. He's very much a stand-up comic, you know, between the songs, which is like that extra element. Yeah, he is just a funny guy. He's got my kind of sense. He's got my kind of guitar playing style in terms of what just resonates with me and I love. And then I also find him just naturally very funny as well. He's got my kind of dry sense of humor. So in more ways than one, he's just a hero to me. And that will come out, I think, in this chat we have now, as we should just go through the career, really, the band's discography.
Well, I was going to say, whilst I just want to jump in here, because I was actually watching an interview with Michael the other day, and I thought it was hilarious because it was just a brief sort of a brief section of a full interview where he was talking about, he said, you know, I've been introduced to several different types of music through my daughters, because he said, you know, when they were growing up, I had them on rock and sort of, you know, AC/DC and Led Zeppelin and that sort of thing. And he said, they're like that then. And he said, like all children, you know, they've grown to disappoint me. And he said, you know, going in the car, he said, occasionally I'll sort of let them put on something that they want to. And he said, it is sub music, you know, it's just like, I don't even consider it music. It's not of any quality. It's just utter filth, mind filth.
Very true. But then also he kind of, I think, because he has that holistic just love for like everything, as long as it's got some, like we use the word again, honesty behind it, you know, mean it, to quote Lewis Cole. And he did say I don't think I've seen that interview, Loz, but I've seen another one where he talks about the stuff his daughters are into, and he got dragged along to see Billie Eilish.
Yeah, and that's where I was going.
Yeah, and he said, "Do you know what? I can actually respect what she's doing. It's not necessarily my thing, but I can hear something there, something that's worthwhile, something that deserves to at least be
Yeah.
called art." And I totally agree. And Stephen Wilson is again another, hero of mine musically, and I talked about him in was it the first episode, the day one of the festival? I can't remember now.
Yes.
And he's the same, he doesn't mind that sort of thing. He covered a Taylor Swift song recently, and half his fan base hated it. I didn't, because, well, one, because I think it was a good cover, but B, because I guess I've got that kind of openness to all kinds of music, and I quite like Taylor Swift. It's a good tune. What's wrong with someone covering that? And just the stick he got from it. It amazes me that someone can be a fan of someone like Stephen Wilson and then begrudge him for releasing a song like Permeating or covering Taylor Swift's Last Great American Dynasty, I think it was. Just, you're either an open person or you're not. And I don't get how a closed off person could like anything that Stephen Wilson's ever done. You'd be like your double glazing mate, listening to that shite. So
well, true. And also I personally find with a lot of things that for me to truly enjoy something, I have to resonate with the actual person behind it, whether it's someone playing a character as an actor, or even in terms of like a stage performer, or a stage sort of presence, taking on a character to do your musical performance.
And you can definitely resonate with Michael Eckerfeld as a person, as a character, can't you?
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's a video on YouTube where someone just like throws a Big Mac on stage, and he just, but not in an aggressive way. I think it was like he was joking about something, and someone basically passes him or tosses him a Big Mac, and he just like pauses the song for like, I don't know, a few minutes and just eats a Big Mac. Like, and you would think, well, how's that funny? It's not only funny, it's entertaining, and it feels like it was worth doing.
Yeah,
you
had to be there, man.
Not that I think he was like viewing it as any kind of performance. He was just being himself, and he's just a naturally funny guy. So it just so many strands to that guy that I've got big respect for. Although I probably wouldn't go for a Big Mac, but then he didn't order a Big Mac, did he? It was just given to him.
The situation arose.
So yeah, but let's go back to his guitar playing for a minute. Because he was capable of shredding to some degree, and he did for certain solos and passages, but more importantly, he kind of understood what was best for the band. And again, it's the restraint required for that. In that sense, it's important for me to say that for me, the best guitarists are really just kind of conveying what's in their soul rather than their brain. And so subsequently, it's like they're playing from the heart rather than just bypassing that altogether. And it's like almost being a demonstration of what their hands can do, which means nothing to me. The likes of Joe Satriani, etc., couldn't care less. Whereas Michael Eckerfeld perfectly sums up what I'm talking about here. He can do some of that stuff. And I suppose we talk about lineup changes. We'll get to that, won't we? Where another guitarist comes in and unfortunately brings a little bit too much of that shreddery into it for me. But yeah, Michael is my ultimate guitarist ever, like, because he is that cross and understanding of the two and the perfect synergy, I guess, of that. So we briefly mentioned the first two albums, but really it's the third one where this stuff starts coming in. It's really the cornerstone, I think, for them, perhaps more than any other album in their career, which is called My Arms, Your Hearse.
Yes.
The title being taken from lyrics by a band called Comus, by the way, who were a huge influence. But My Arms, Your Hearse has some of their best tracks on it. And I suppose if you're not into the metal side, this is kind of the first record that at least ventures at times completely away from that. I mean, just listen to the outro, which is rather fittingly called Epilogue. In fact, this track sums up what I'm talking about with his guitar playing, really. It's got this very technical riffing in it, but then these moments of restraint and beauty. And the final outro, the sort of closer to the album, this riff that just plays over and over. It's quite a simple riff. I could just listen to it over and over again forever, and really I don't think I'd get bored of it. It's so beautiful. And well, let's go on to the next album, just again for the sake of time, because and also because I just can't wait to talk about this album.
Sure.
They followed up My Arms Your Hearse with the album that again, I'll say this, I cannot believe didn't make the top 10 because it's my favorite of their albums. I think I'm still shocked this didn't get in, because I really
You're shocked.
It's I think it's their best album, which is called Loz. Can you name this?
It's Still Life.
Still Life. But yeah, my favorite album by my favorite band, and it genuinely at the moment it just hasn't made the top 10. It's very technical, very diverse. I mean, even he finds it difficult to play, and so they very rarely play many songs from this album. In fact, I'll see if I can learn something off it and stick it in, because I have actually learned some riffs off it down the years. I've been a fan of this band since I was like 17, 18. And I've, been challenging myself to learn their stuff throughout that. And definitely the riffs off Still Life tend to be the harder ones. But I can think of a good few off the top of my head that I can still play. A couple of tracks I can play from start to end actually on that album. So I don't know. I'll pick out a riff here and there and just insert them.
Well, I mean, just looking at the track listing now, I mean, there's a good few that I'm thinking, oh, you could get a little bit from there. I mean, perhaps even Benighted or from Moonlapse Vertigo.
Yeah, I can play stuff off. In fact, yeah, Benighted. Well, Benighted is an acoustic track, so I can. I can. Off the top of my head, I can play quite a bit of that. Moonlapse Vertigo is a great track, really underrated. Yeah. I can play a bit off that. The More, I mean, that's like the first one on the album.
Oh, yeah. I always love Face of Melinda as well. That's such a track.
Face of Melinda is amazing. A really good song to sum up Opeth. And then I really love, I mean, I just love all the tracks on that album. Godhead's Lament track is amazing. And then you've got Serenity Painted Death, and then White Cluster. The whole album's a masterpiece. A masterpiece. And it's not made the top 10. So
how?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll record some riffs here and there that just can sound all right, because the beauty of Opeth really, and maybe the thing I love the most, is that these songs are usually pretty lengthy. I'd say minimum of 8 minutes on the whole with their tracks. But they're so seamlessly woven, and the dynamics between the acoustic and the very, very heavy at times is just so smooth, so natural. And so for me to just pluck a riff here and there and insert it, I mean, I'll try and do so. I can't guarantee it's going to make you want to listen to the band or do them anyway justice, because it's taken out of context. It doesn't quite feel right. But yeah, I mean, there's so many riffs on Still Life that I'd love to just throw in. And likewise, their follow-up album, Loz, which is, well, I mean, to be honest with you, it's interchangeable with Still Life for my favorite. It's arguably their groundbreaking breakthrough album, Blackwater Park. And probably the one I'd point people to first, because it's very, very catchy. It has excellent production, thanks to Stephen Wilson, actually. I said he was a good producer, didn't I? There's a great documentary. In fact, talking about sense of humor, Michael's sense of humor, and indeed Stephen Wilson's sense of humor come out in this documentary, because people associate Stephen Wilson with deep melancholia and like he's the master of depression. I don't see it that way. His music can have that melancholic sensibility, but you see an interview with him and he seems a very content, happy guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, probably, well, I don't even know if it bothers him, this mantle of just being like the master of that sort of thing. I don't think it bothers him. I don't think he cares. But in this documentary where he's working with Michael and Opeth on the recording of Blackwater Park, it's quite funny. Like both their sense of humor shine through. There's one bit I remember where they're about to record something or try a new effect on something, and Stephen's like turns slowly round to face Michael, and he's like, "Will this turn out to be a prodigy or a problem child?" it's the way he says it.
Mm.
And then Michael's like, "How tight will this be?" He's like, "As tight as a witch's cleft." It's like- But anyway, Blackwater Park is really the quintessential Opeth record, I'd say.
Mm.
It's not hard to see why. It's quite possibly the best, and understandably the most popular. For those that aren't remotely into metal, even though this band were very metal at times, as I've said, keep listening to this, because they did mellow in their later years. And I know a lot of people who are a bigger fan of the later stuff. But sorry, go on, Lars. I felt an intake of
Well, I was
breath
going to
there.
say, in all fairness, I mean, you're far, far more tolerant of metal and death metal stuff than I am. I mean, I sort of shunned bands like Lamb of God, and really, for the most part. And if you manage to make a convert of me to the point where Opeth is not only in my top 10 albums, I'll tell you now, spoiler alert, it's in the top 5.
Oh my goodness! Squidward!
Well, I don't want to guess at what that album is. Okay, yeah. See, it's just amazing, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
like I say, they're a top one band for me. They are my favorite band, and yeah, it's very strange thing to reckon with or come to terms with, from my point of view, that I really did sit down at length and try and think of what my top 10 were. And I was looking at the top 10, and I was looking at the likes of Still Life and Blackwater Park, and I couldn't make a case for sticking them above any of those 10.
I'd almost, if you permit me, I'd almost liken it to my picking of Endgame and almost no other MCU films, because on their own, there's things that can be picked apart and criticized and all the rest of it. But the feeling I get from the collective majority is so powerful, and yet you have to accept that in album form or in film form that there are things that manage to surpass it.
Yeah, and I think when we get to the top 10, which of course will be very shortly, then I'm sure you'll probably understand why, Lars. Each one has kind of ended up somehow above Still Life and Blackwater Park, and another Opeth one, which I'll get to in due course. So yeah, enough, I guess, on Blackwater Park for now. I'm sure at some point in this I'll stick a riff in from there. I don't know. But after Blackwater Park, just I guess because we've got their whole career to talk through here, and I think it'd be interesting to talk through their career because they've got a very interesting one.
Oh yes.
After Blackwater Park, they released 2 albums back to back, a double album, if you like, although there was a bit of a gap, a few months maybe. And one of them was very, very heavy, called Deliverance, and the other one was entirely soft and acoustic, called Damnation. So Deliverance and Damnation. I mean, if you combined them, it's absolutely one of their best. I mean, individually, neither of them rank that high for me. Damnation, I suppose, would. I mean, let's talk about Damnation, actually, rather than Deliverance. Christ, my diction today. So Damnation is absolutely one of their best albums. I mean, the first track alone, Window Pane, I'll insert the riff here. It's gorgeous. And then the verse kicks in. I'll insert that as well. I'll include a couple of riffs off Damnation, actually, just so you can see what I mean, because it's an album that suits an acoustic guitar, because that's how it was largely written and performed. And in fact, whilst we're on Window Pane, the first track, there's a riff towards the end, which is one of my favorites they've ever written. I mean, admittedly, when I insert these riffs, again, like I said, they're taken out of context of the whole piece, and indeed the whole album. So, and especially for someone who loves the band like me, it does almost feel like sacrilege for me to do that. But hey, I've started it now.
You've started, so you finish.
Yeah, and if you hear any of these little short interludes and think, oh, that sounds cool, then that probably means you will love this band when you listen to them properly. That's what I'd say. And right. So I talked about another album of theirs, the pedestal, the pantheon, the podium of Opeth Records. Let's get swiftly to the number 3 of those. Not necessarily number 3 as in bronze medalist, but just number 3 as in the third of the 3 that make it. It's really hard for me to choose the order of these 3. I feel like maybe this would actually be number 3 bronze. I don't know. If I listened to this album, I'd be like, bloody hell, this is the best thing they've ever done. It's such as the nature of my love for these 3 albums. Do you know what I'm going to say, Elos? Can you name it?
I can, but only because I've got Wikipedia open.
Oh, okay, I like your honesty there. Well, in that case, I'll name it. It's Ghost Reveries. It's the album that introduced me to Opeth, actually. And this has got some absolute bangers on it. I mean, Ghost of Perdition, the track that starts it off, that is commonly seen as like their best song ever, very widely acknowledged as like the best thing Opeth ever did. You know, if someone's being introduced to Opeth, it's like, oh, start with Ghost of Perdition. Make sure you start with Ghost of Perdition. And I think, well, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It is brilliant. I'll say it again, but it's not my favorite song on Ghost Reveries, to be honest. But it is brilliant. I'll say it for a 4th time. I mean, yeah, there's a track called Harlequin Forest on this album, which is my favorite on this album, and quite possibly my favorite song they've ever done. There's just lots of great tracks on this album. Baying of the Hounds is amazing. Beneath the Mire is great. There's loads of great stuff on this album. It's got the tightest performance from all of the respective musicians. It's got the best production, probably. It just catches them in a flash of just everyone being at the top of their game in terms of songwriting.
Wasn't it Baying of the Hounds was your start with Opeth?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, this was the first album I heard of theirs. So, yeah, Baying of the Hounds may well have been the first track I heard from that album, because I didn't just put the album on for myself in order. No, I think it was possibly even Ace. You know, like I was with Ace and he put the album on, or maybe Gaz. That would make more sense. I don't know.
Well, let's put it this way. I can remember a conversation in which you were like, the first Opeth song I heard was Baying of the Hounds. So,
okay. Well, I probably told you that when I could remember that it was. Whereas nowadays, it's left me. But what a track to start with! I would introduce someone to Opeth with Baying of the Hounds before Ghost of Perdition. Personally, I think Baying of the Hounds is more palatable, more immediately likable, and actually a better showcase for what they're about.
Well, I mean, I always had a real sort of place in my heart for Deliverance. The title track of the album is one of my favorites.
Deliverance is an amazing song. I mean, like, Deliverance as an album is probably one of my least favorites, if anything, of their albums. But the track Deliverance, there is no denying, is just an absolute beast of a song. And it's one they always play live. I mean, I've seen them I've seen them 4 times, and I think I've seen Deliverance 4 times, which tells you how much the demand for it and how much the band think of it and like playing it, you know.
And again, we were talking earlier about like boss battle music. I mean, what a chaotic frenzy that erupts into.
Yeah, I mean, I might record the outro to Deliverance and stick it in, but then at the same time, I might not, because again, taken out of context and performed on an acoustic, I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
Well, before I forget, you know full well, it's something that I mentioned last time. If you're going to do me any favors in any of this, I'm casting my vote for the Ivy, because you know I just love that track.
So did you say Patterns in the Ivy?
I did, yes.
Yes, sorry, the sound cut out, or at least it did for me. Patterns in the Ivy is from Blackwater Park,
yes,
and is a lovely piece of acoustic playing. Very simple, but very, I'll definitely record that and put it in.
Please do.
So, and I suppose just whilst we're still on the topic of Ghost Reveries, this was the final album with what I would call the classic lineup. Peter Lindgren, my favorite sort of other guitarist there's been in Opeth, and Martin Lopez, my favorite drummer there's ever been in Opeth, both bowed out after this album. And so it's unsurprising, really, to learn that with the next album, they sounded a bit different. You know, the lineup change had quite a big effect on this. And I suppose you'll find that after this album, they become a much more diverse and mellow kind of progressive rock band, which is unsurprising given their age by this point. But I mean, I suppose we've got to talk about. Well, no, in fact, whilst we're on this topic, I mean, yeah, these days they're not quite the band I once loved, but I'm totally okay with that. They're much older than me, and understandably have just mellowed, and they've amassed a different fan base these days for having ventured into that more palatable territory in terms of less distortion and screaming. In fact, Michael doesn't really growl at all these days, apart from when he performs the old songs live. But
well, I mean, it's got to have an accumulative effect on your vocal cords, hasn't it? And as someone who makes his living from singing, I mean, you can somewhat sort of understand trying to move away.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm glad he doesn't growl anymore, apart from on those original songs, because I don't want him to ruin his voice. He's got a fantastic clean voice. Yeah. But I suppose, I mean, the musicianship, this is the big thing, really, the crux of the matter. It's not the fact that, like, there's no screaming anymore or that the distortion's been toned down. It's more that I think the musicianship has sadly become somewhat less inventive. And I think, like, he wears his influences on his sleeve a little bit too much these days with regards to maybe the classic 70s kind of progressive mellotron prog stuff, which somehow was always in the band's DNA, but yet didn't come out at the same time. There is an album that is, well, it's a watershed between the heaviness and the previous brilliance, you know, with the capital everything of Ghost Reveries, and then the mellower stuff, which we'll get to. And believe it or not, the album is called Watershed, which many didn't realize was actually a watershed moment in the band's career. Because, my God, this album is as heavy as they've ever got at times. I mean, it's the first track, Air Apparent. You know, we talked about Scott Walker, The Drift, in the last episode. Well, Michael was very interested in that as well. Because I got into Opeth when Ghost Reveries came out, I then went back and explored, obviously, their back catalogue and discovered the likes of Still Life, Blackwater Park. And then I had this, as I was now an ultra fan, you know, at this point, I had what felt like an agonizing wait between, you know, that and then this album, Watershed, coming out, which was maybe about 2 years or something. And so naturally, as a super fan would of a band, you know, I was lapping up any like tidbits of information, any interviews, you know, I was Googling the band once a day, you know, to see if I could learn anything about this album. And I learned that Michael was very, very interested in Scott Walker, and in particular, like we talked about, the direction of his career and the drift, and you know how does a mind get to that? And so Watershed is kind of loosely inspired by the drift. It starts with this gorgeous piece of music called Coil. Yeah, Coil is beautiful. And it's the first time they featured a female vocalist as well, and it just works perfectly. It really does.
Yes.
And then it goes into the second track called Air Apparent, which is just brutal. And I mean, yeah, you know, without wanting to go into detail too much on any of these albums, again, for the sake of time, there is a track on Watershed I want to mention, which is called Hessian Peel.
Yeah.
And I'd say, by all means, listen to that as an introduction to this band, a bit like Harlequin Forest or, like Luz said, Face of Melinda, because it is a great introduction to the very best of what this band were all about. And I emphasize were, because let's move forwards. after Watershed, they did an album called Heritage,
Mm.
which, I mean, talk about an album that split a fan base in two. Yeah, because I know the band will defend it to the hilt, but it did kind of come out of nowhere in terms of the juxtaposition between that and Watershed, arguably their heaviest. And so I can understand why it was largely hated. But here's the thing, and I've said it once before, but I will reinforce this because it's so important. I don't think it's for the lack of distortion and brutality, but it's that the songwriting seemed to also deteriorate into like laziness. Like, it's hard to explain, and hopefully I am well enough. It wasn't a sudden absence of heaviness, but rather the ham-fisted composition of these songs. And that was really noticeable for me, above the lack of, growling. I still, for the record, I do really like Heritage, but it does represent such a tonal shift for the band. And what bothers me, I guess, is it's the songwriting. I'm just saying the same thing about 3 or 4 times there, but it's just important, I guess, for me to make that point. It was never about the abstinence all of a sudden from growling or from turning it up to 11 with the distortion. It was much more about the song composition, which was a much more notable change for me. Less fluent and much more, well, ham-fisted is probably the best way. It's as if it was put together very, very quickly. I don't know if it was or not. I say, look, I can't profess to be in the mind of this guy. Far from it. Michael Lagerfeld will always be a musical hero of mine. And I will never, I don't think, find someone who writes music in a way that just blows my mind and connects with my soul more than the way he did over let's say, the periods between My Arms, Your Hers and Ghost Reveries, even Watershed. But here's the interesting thing. I mean, well, no, in fact, sorry, Luz, because Watershed is such an important album in their career, I'd hate to move on without hearing what you think about it. I'm so sorry if I've just waffled through this.
No, it is funny for me because as I say, I've got Wikipedia up, but for me, I'd sort of had the best of Opeth compiled into 2 burnt CDs by you. And so, I'm not quite as au fait as I might be with what came from where, but the pick of the litter, as it were, to be selected in that way. I mean, that was such an amazing experience, and they fits in so well with sort of times in my life, and coming back from certain events and gigs and all the rest of it, and having certain tracks and be a part of that is definitely left its mark. But for me, I had Watershed as an album in the car. I think it's whether I'd bought it or not, but it's certainly one of the few that I've extensively listened to as an album, and so I've got a special place in my heart for it.
Lars, it was an honor at the time to record a playlist of like Opeth or burn a playlist, of Opeth tracks to CD for you as your introduction to the band. Rest assured, I put a lot of love and thought and time into crafting that little playlist for you.
Oh yeah, I could tell.
And I think it's like a good, not just, well, I mean, I can't remember what songs were on it, to be honest. I can think of a couple that probably would have been. It's a good introduction to the band and what they're all about. But I suppose the point is that if you then go off and listen to their albums in sequence, not necessarily in chronological order of the albums, but I just mean each album from start to end, yeah, you'll get a feeling of just how good they are at pulling it all together seamlessly, despite really quite the seismic shift sometimes in tone. And this is the point, you see, when it got to Watershed, you could almost, well, I mean, you could hear the new members finding their way, but there was a lot more shredding from Frederick, and I just didn't like that from the start. I didn't like. There was one good solo from Frederick on that album. The rest of it was just, as far as I see it, just mindless shredding. Does nothing for me. It was the last thing I ever wanted to be incorporated into Opeth's sound, and so it was. I accepted it, but it wasn't the easiest thing for me to come to terms with, because I could almost sounded like the start of the end for me with that band. But and then they went off and did Heritage, which is very, very different. And yeah, it's got some good moments, but just, yeah, like I say, if you listen to an album from start to end, Heritage, I can't see many people getting through it, if I'm being honest, especially not as an introduction to the band. But here's the interesting thing. I must have said that about 5 times now during this band's career. No, but this is really interesting, because for all I've just said, right, with Heritage, they did follow it up with by far their best of the quote unquote new era, and like one of their best albums overall. I'd say probably top 5 of everything they've ever done with the follow up to Heritage, which is called Pale Communion. I mean, again, it's still very much a different band, but it's a wonderful record. I mean, yeah, like I say, they've staunchly opposed this idea that I'm about to put forward, but it for me, it's kind of no longer Opeth at this stage, really. I consider it a slightly different band. When Frederick came in for Watershed onwards, there was like just this vibrato bollocks just coming into it, whereas Michael always, and Peter Lindgren, the previous guitarist, always knew how to just hold a note in a solo, and just it had so much more impact for that and the restraint, like I say. And
yes, I always felt that the Frederick was a good guitarist, but almost like a bad fit for the band. You know, he would have. I always pictured him being part of Iron Maiden.
well,
that wailing sort of solo.
Well, he used to be in Arch Enemy, and in that sense, I see him less as a guitarist and more as a technician, if I'm honest.
I really thought you were going to say, like, I think of him less of a guitarist and more of a twat.
I would stop well short of calling him a twat. But if I'm being honest, I do begrudge him joining Opeth. It's not his fault. But then it's important for me to say that I don't begrudge Opeth for like going in that direction. I'd rather they took their own path than what I wanted them to in their career. And if anything, that only kind of strengthens Michael Ackerfeld as a musical hero for me, because I will always have that golden period I can listen to when the stars and the planets aligned. And I mean, afterwards, I mean, like I said, Pale Communion is a great album, but the others are largely forgettable. I'll make sure I include a riff or two off Pale Communion, and it'll probably sound no different on here, you know, just hearing it on here, because there's some great riffs on that. River's a highlight. There's some great tracks on that album. It really feels like a cohesive album from start to end. Yes, it's got some little moments that are reminiscent of kind of what they were doing on Heritage, but no, this feels like much more of a worked out, a thought out, conceived, just much more lovingly done record. And I feel like, I don't know, I wouldn't dare speak for any member of the band, but it's whenever they speak about Heritage and defend it, I almost feel like, is that really what you think? It's like Fleetwood Mac will defend Tusk to the hilt, but that was the album that everyone hated after Rumours, you know. I quite like Tusk, to be fair, but it's not as good as Rumours. It's not. Like, Rumours is the classic.
Could it be?
I mean, a lot of like artists, their most famous album, I do actually consider the best. Like Thriller, Michael Jackson. You know, in our circle of friends, everyone seems to love Dangerous. That's the one album of his that I like it, but no, I'm sorry, like his best. No. Like, anyway, we've gone from Opeth to Michael Jackson.
Yes,
but
it's quite a leap.
Well, it is quite a leap, but it's probably similar to the leap we were talking about in terms of Watershed to Heritage, you know. So Pale Communion is a wonderful album. I'll make sure I put something off that here just to represent it. But yeah, at least Michael stayed true to himself, and he will always have my utmost respect for that.
Yes.
And in terms of seeing them live, I have seen them live for maybe 5 times, I think. I mean, Loz, you came with me for one of them, didn't you?
Well, as you well know, I came with you for at least one of them I can remember, and I didn't get to see Opeth, did I?
Well, I couldn't remember if I genuinely couldn't remember if you were one of the people that got kicked out of that.
Oh yes.
Yeah. All right. So, what shall I explain this, or shall you?
Well, yeah. I remember at the time going up the motorway, and you'd revealed that you'd got several little pre-rolls for just when Opeth were taking the stage, and I remember, I think it was Arch Enemy actually at the time that we're on, and you were like, right, okay, we'll have a quick smoke now, and then we'll be it'll be ready for when Opeth take the stage. Oh, okay, grand. And maybe my recollection is slightly different to that of others, but I can tell you from my memory that there were some of us that were sort of being discreet, and there were some of us that were sort of puffing plumes of smoke up into the air. And I am not a small chap by almost any standards of measurement. So I do tend to be fairly conspicuous in almost anything I do. So the first I knew of anything going on was when my arm was grabbed and I sort of spun round on the spot, and I just had this bouncer in my face who just gave me this look of sort of, I don't want to have to fight you, but I will. And I was like, right, okay. And at the time I thought, okay, I'm about to be arrested. Like no one's, because I was driving as well. So I was like, no one's getting home. The gig's ruined. Like, and I just sort of marched straight to the door, straight out of the door, all the way around, like straight to the car park, got in the car and just sort of like refused to look back. And I know a few of the lads ended up sort of stood outside of the gig venue trying to listen through like a back door. Whereas you had been super stealthy and managed to conceal your smoking, and you and Gaz managed to stick around for Opeth. But unfortunately, I had to listen to the album in the car.
I sort of vaguely remember. I do actually remember the manner in which I was smoking, and it was, to be fair, quite well concealed. But this girl came up and was like, "Oh, can I have a drag on that?" And then she wouldn't piss off. And so I was worried that she was going to blow the lid on like what was going on. And then the next thing I knew, I turned around to the left, and you and like someone else who maybe I shouldn't name was part of our entourage that night, getting basically dragged away by the arm, And I was like, "Oh shit!" And then I just kind of, I mean, as if I can remember exactly what happened after that, because this is going back to at least 10 years, I'd say. But yeah, I did at least get to see them. And this was probably, I think, post Watershed. This was like not as in Time of Night, post Watershed as in post Watershed the album.
Yeah,
not as in like after 8 p.m. Yeah, but I mean that was probably the a memorable experience for you, I'm sure. But the funny thing is, when I look back on Opeth, I probably the one I remember the most is well, why wouldn't it be? It was seeing them at the Royal Albert Hall.
I'm really sorry, Scott. Can I just, because yet again I've had something sort of tumbled into my the forefront of my subconscious, and it's a memory that needs to be shared for the prosperity of the human race, I think, really. Because
why would
afterwards,
I stand in the way of that?
Exactly. How could you? After the performance, people had sort of made their way back to me in the car, because I just stayed there, and I was chilling out and trying to sort of like calm myself down a little bit, because I was still convinced that somehow they were going to have my name on record, and I was going to go home and there'd be a squad car on the drive and my mum in tears or something. So everyone's back, and like everyone's in the car and they're having a good time, and we were sort of in a bit of like a secluded parking area. But it was quite close to the actual venue. But certainly not, within sort of 5 minutes walk. I still sort of amazed as to how we managed to find such a perfect park spot.
Which I think was what was the Carling Academy at the time in Digbeth, Dale End in Birmingham.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. It's the O2 Academy now elsewhere. But yeah.
So yeah, there was again. I'll spare their blushes by not naming them specifically, but there was one of our group that had decided the best way to sort of celebrate the evening's revelry was to stand with his top half out of the sunroof whilst smoking a joint, as from the sort of the dual track main road in front of us that we could see, I saw a riot van come towards us, and as they sort of got within sort of view of us, they turned their lights on, and I nearly died, and had to sort of quickly just be like, "Get in the car," and I sped off like as safely as possible, but still out of this car park onto this dual carriageway and away. And as we came out and onto the road and away, the riot van, which I think in all fairness, if they'd have been desperate to catch us, then they probably could have. They pulled into the exact area where we were with the Blues and Twos going as we made off up the road. And I have never been so relieved in my life, because I was just like, my Christ, unless they take off up this dual carriageway after us, like we've just made a hell of an escape. And I just remember thinking, like, for us to have been found with somebody like through the skylight smoking a joint. I was just like, there would have been no way of sort of talking around it. That would have been it for all of us.
But was I there for this?
Yeah, you were in the back of the car, yeah, or maybe even shotgun.
I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, well, isn't that funny? But yeah,
maybe, honestly, maybe just because my run-ins with the law are probably more insane than that.
Oh yes, yeah, quite.
And I don't know. That doesn't ring any bells. Whereas I do remember earlier in the night.
See, the funny thing is, I think because I acted so quickly that I managed to get us out of there before anything happened.
No, I can imagine
slipped.
I can imagine the gauntlet of terror in your mind, which you wouldn't forget in a hurry.
Oh yeah.
Whereas for me, if it was, I'm not going to name anyone, but I've almost got an opinion of who it might have been in that party that night. I can imagine that just being something quite normal for them, and so them being pulled down into the car seat, and then for them and indeed me, 10 seconds later, nothing had happened. Whereas for you, I can totally understand why that was a bigger deal.
Well, as I say, especially as the one who was driving, and I'm a pretty chilled guy, and I instantly had to be like, get back in the car. Because I was so like this, I as I say, I knew I was about to take off up a dual track, and I was like, I can't possibly have him like waggling away through the top of the car. Anyway, this has taken up far too much time, but I do love to give you all a little insight into our escapades.
No, I'm glad to take that little trip down memory lane. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the Opeth gig that I remember, and like I said, briefly before, was the understandably most memorable one, because it was my favorite band playing at the Royal Albert Hall in this epic like one-off show where they played the whole of we talked about Blackwater Park being sort of a breakthrough, groundbreaking album for them, and they recognized it as such. And I think maybe it was the 20th anniversary of Blackwater Park or something like that. Blackwater Park was 2001, so with that 2011, was it 10 years ago, that gig? It could have been.
Yeah.
No, but that would only be a 10-year anniversary, wouldn't it? Maybe it was the 10-year anniversary of Blackwater Park. So they played it in 2011, which was 10 years ago. It could have been 10 years ago, that gig. I really don't know. But anyway.
I remember you agonizing about whether to pay the extra and go backstage and meet the band and get to ask a question and all that sort of thing. That's really in my mind.
Yeah, well, here's the stupid thing. I ended up paying triple what the tickets cost because, well, it's not too cheap in the Royal Albert Hall. And I wanted to make a night of it. And so I was bankrolling everyone for drinks like whiskey, and I bought like a shirt and a hoodie and then I got a parking ticket the next morning. Not as if I was parked right outside the Royal Albert Hall, obviously. No, I parked at my mate's in Clapham and we made our way in from there. But I hadn't parked in the right spot and I got done for that the next morning, shafted again. So I think that gig, I don't know, if you count my ticket for myself plus the alcohol plus the merchandise plus the parking ticket, between 300 and 400, like, yeah, probably close to 400 quid, I'd say.
Yeesh.
So I'd have been much better off, just paying to meet the band and cutting my losses for another 30 on top of that or something. Deary me. So, yeah, there we go. Opeth. I mean, just quickly, I suppose, after Pale Communion, which is a masterpiece, they've done 2 albums since then. One was called Sorceress, which I know the band are very fond of. Very much like Heritage for me, Sorceress, not a big fan. And then one called In Corda Venenum, which is Latin for something. And they released this album in English and Swedish, actually. And yeah, it's better. It's better. More along the Pale Communion vibe for me. But no, of the new era, if you like, era, Loz, by far the highlight is Pale Communion. I'll say it again, ladies and gentlemen, Pale Communion. If you're not into like screaming and distortion too much, Pale Communion, I've said it again, is a really good one to listen to. It's just a really good progressive rock band. But no, I feel like I've said Pale Communion more than I've said the names of other better albums. So just to address that, Ghost Reveries, Ghost Reveries, Ghost Reveries, Ghost Reveries, Blackwater Park, Blackwater Park, Blackwater Park, Blackwater Park, Blackwater Park, Still life, 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 still life. I feel like that's just readdressed the balance there.
Yeah, the scales have tipped.
I believe so. So, and I'll say it one more time: still life, because I could have sworn we started. No, it was yesterday, wasn't it? With Sigur Rós, and we had In Absentia by Porcupine Tree, and I was like, well, this is probably my number 11, if I'm being honest. Then we got to Tack by Sigur Rós, and I was like, well, no, that edges In Absentia. We'll put Tack
It's
number
new 11.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I think Still Life would be my number 11. You know, it's very interesting.
It's fast becoming another entry on your drinking game.
And well, yes, it is, isn't it? But I suppose only for this episode, because we won't be mentioning number 11 again, I guess, going forward. Because
will we?
My notes have got number 10 in sight for me now, and I'm looking at the name of that band and the name of that album now at number 10. And to be honest with you, I still feel vindicated for it being there above Opeth, and I have just lovingly talked about Opeth with your good self for a lengthy period of time. Christ, this is going to be a long episode. But I am looking at number 10 and thinking, yeah, that deserves to be there. So we will, I guess, Loz, we'll close this festival out there. Is there anything else you want to say on Opeth? Because there's so much to say about Opeth.
I mean, there is so much to say. Honestly, as sort of cringy as it sounds, they're one of the few bands that I would genuinely, not that they're ever going to hear this, but I'd like to say thank you. You know, they've really made some beautiful music, some really affected music, some great albums, absolutely, definitely some great tracks, and I think the world would be a worse place without them.
Yeah, and as you were doing this, I've just typed up because we talked about Tack by Sigur Rós being up there as one of my favorite albums, maybe number 11. And Tack means thank you in Icelandic, and so I was thinking, I wonder what thank you means in English, in Swedish rather.
I know what thank you means in English.
I know. I thought this might be a smooth little segue, but I couldn't quite do it in time. You finished what you were saying, and then I was still halfway through typing.
Oh.
But anyway, thank you in Swedish is, Loz, do you want to guess?
No, not without being racist, no.
Oh, it's actually tack. It's the same as Icelandic. Yeah. So to everyone involved in Opeth, I mean, yes, I suppose I've still got to include Frederick and Martin Axe and Rock, the new drummer. I preferred the old Opeth, but just to everyone who's ever been involved in Opeth ever existing, I just want to say tack.
Tack to you all.
And, tack to you, Loz. Tack to you, the listener.
Indeed, tack to you, Scott.
It's been less bands on this day 3, but I typically, as I thought it would take longer. But that's fine. And we're into our top 10 albums next. So thank you so much for listening, as always.
Thanks, guys.
And I just want to quickly and finally kind of apologize again if I've dominated this little festival a bit. I know me and Lars have reconciled and I'm totally cool with it. It's just because I'm such a big music fan and I really wanted to talk about some of these bands, and I'd love nothing more for you to check out some of these guys. But hey, if you've been tuning in for more Lars than me so far, then I apologize wholeheartedly that you've been thoroughly shortchanged over the past couple of hours. I assure you that is to be addressed immediately, isn't it, Lars, with our top 10, and then going forward.
Oh, that's it. There's certainly some waffling from me to come, but my scope of music certainly is far less broad than Scott, and it seemed unfair as he's really agonized over his choices, and I almost struggled to pick 10. So
so let's wrap it up, and then we shall get into the top 10. The top 10 albums with the next episode, which is what, 12, is it 13? I don't know.
I mean, honestly, this is going to sound a little like twee, but I cannot wait. I cannot wait to hear your top 10.
Well,
I will have to wait, but I can't wait.
Yes, you will. It's probably going to be a week from now, isn't it, Lars? We'll probably convene as we
Mm.
normally do on a Tuesday to record. And so, yeah, you've got a week to wait, son. And I've got a week to change my mind about 7 times again on the order.
Yeah.
I'd say the top 5 are in order, but 5 to 10 are very interchangeable. And so it really depends what I've listened to the most recently.
Mm.
But I would
That's
say,
music for you.
I would say once again that I think the top 10 is correct, just maybe not in the right order. Whereas it still amazes me to think that Opeth aren't in there, because look at how long we just talked about them.
Yeah. And
well,
as I say, for them to feature in my top 10 and not yours, I think that really would be a shock horror moment for most folks who know you.
Well, yeah, we'll just have to see when I get to discussing my top 10. We'll see if I convey why they're worthy of usurping my favourite band.
Mm.
So, anything else to say, Loz? Anything at all?
Flibble de gibbet.
Nice. And may I respond to that with FNARP. Right, FNARP, everyone.
Chip, chip, chow.